What does Zardy's Cave, Chapter 1 hide from you behind the scenes? Zardy's Cave's first chapter, Beneath the Bramble, takes you into a spooky subterranean world, where you must run through dark tunnels and claw through dirt while avoiding sinister scarecrows. But how does this game work off camera and behind the scenes? Well, this time, I actually have all the answers, because this is a game I made. So in this video, we'll be breaking down all the encounters in Chapter 1 to show you things you can't typically see, and to give you a peek behind the game dev curtain. The other devs will be chiming in too to share their expertise. There's lots to see, and of course break, so let's jump in. Now this game was a huge labor of love. I can't tell you how many hours I spent working on this, meticulously hiding things to reward the player for being curious and pushing a game's boundaries. And it wouldn't have been possible without my fellow devs, the Regressor and Zach Fierce. So as always, we'll do this in chunks. I'll summarize a small section of the game, then turn back the clock to show you things from a different perspective, and possibly provide additional commentary on how it was made. So once we choose to start Chapter 1 on the title screen, we'll see a cutscene where 3 individuals can be heard talking. If you didn't recognize the voices right away, they're voiced by the lads Astral Spiff, Zach BLTV, and Dak Blake, 3 creators who I enjoy watching. We have a drawn-out dolly shot that ends on a scarecrow, before a series of montage shots begin recapping the brief snippets from Zardy's maze. The player then awakens in an underground world as they realize their axe is being taken from them. They climb to their feet and make their way out of this room into another, where they learn to jump and mantle. They then travel into what we call internally the jump room, which teaches them how seeds work in the game in conjunction with platforming. After clearing this room, they hear a spooky laugh, and as they press on, they'll see a scythe being dragged in front of them as they pull themselves through a prone space. We'll pause it here though and turn back the clock. So starting off, the title screen looks a lot different behind the scenes. Zach, our developer, who you'll hear from later, created a cutaway slice of the world that lets the camera pass from the surface to the underground. You can see that this place looks a lot different from another view, as it's merely just what exists within these shots. We can see Zardy standing back here, and these tunnels just abruptly end. Because hey, why not? The player can't see them. Moving into the actual game, both intro cutscenes exist on the same map. The first place is here, where you'll see we have a cozy campfire area and a cornfield illuminated by moonlight. If we pull the camera back, we'll see all these people are headless. Spooky! This is because the camera normally can't see this and it's cropped off, at least from a typical aspect ratio. The fake sky here is curved around the map, and we can see that Zardy is just kind of chilling back here, floating off the ground. He's waiting to look upward once the camera reaches its destination. We use a camera dolly for this with varying speeds, and Unity's timeline system to pace everything out. The next series of cutscenes actually take place way over here, and each of these cutscenes happen in this mock-up field. As each animation sequence occurs in the timeline, the active camera is changed for the duration of that shot. A lot of these probably look goofy from this perspective, but I'll point out some funny things here. So there's a corn pushing shot, a shot of the player running and jumping, a shot of the player swinging their axe, and another one of the player being chased by Zardy into a hole. For one, given my YouTube videos deal with poking around games to find hidden things, we'd sometimes lean into that for animations. The Regressor animated and modeled most of what you see in the game, but while in animation calls, we'd often hide funny things like this. Zardy chases a player actually in a T-pose, and only starts running when the player looks behind them. And when the player jumps into the hole, Zardy returns to his T-pose and spins around humorously and unloads, following the silly trend. Over here you can find Zardy and Pumpkin Jack channeling their inner anime powers. Now, I'm not going to focus on all the things I hid like this, because it's weird to be like, yo, I hid all this, but here it is. That would be like a pirate burying their treasure and then putting its location on blast. It ruins it for people who enjoy finding things. But I will highlight some of the trickery and development techniques we did to pull off our scares and cutscenes to hopefully inspire other people who want to make games. So after the player falls, we can see that the vine that grabs the axe doesn't actually go down the hallway. It pulls the axe through the dirt, and the camera dipping down is what hides this. It then moves below the player in the room. The next room does hide a secret though. Originally, there was a falling rock that triggered when the player stepped into this room. It would dislodge from the ceiling, hit the earth, and fall into the pit. We ended up cutting it because it didn't add much, and it interrupted the player looking around the space. When the player makes it across the jump area with the seed, there's a trigger volume here that plays a creepy laugh. The source of the laugh can't be seen, but it does hint that the player is being watched. This This laugh location will eventually be used again for something else that tons of players miss. If we zoom out of this room though, you'll see that all the cutaway earth segments lead to nowhere. Next up, we have the prone space. We can see what really happens on the other side. Drought spawns in half animated as he walks by. It looks goofy from this angle, but the player can only see the scythe and the bottom of him. He then unloads before the player has a chance to see him. Given there was nowhere Drought could have gone, it makes the player wonder what just happened. Did the bro just walk through the wall? Next up, the player encounters this giant mound of plants that they must enter. They'll find their axe again, but must break it in order to obtain it. They'll then chop their way through the maze and exit the top, retracing their steps backwards through a now overgrown area. They will learn rock climbing and flower key switches in the jump room from before, and ultimately will plant a seed to reach what we call the corn passage room. As they enter, they see crows fly away, and a scarecrow slides off its post and into the corn below. Of course, into the corn we must go. As we push through, we'll hear things moving around us, ultimately getting jump scared by another scarecrow that fell to the side. We'll eventually emerge into a tunnel that loops around, and as we begin to crawl through, Zardy will pop out and scream as he begins to chase us. And pause. Let's break that all down. So looking at that room with the giant mound of plants from a different angle, we can see quite a bit more than usual. There's a large hole to the outside in this room, and the vine maze itself is generated in layers. So the maze is procedurally generated, but the transition points between the floors are the same. We can watch the player grab the axe from a different perspective though, and you'll be able to see how things look when they're not on camera. While this cutscene takes place, this door loads in, and we must now exit from the top. I'm going to pause here though, and let the Regressor talk about creating these plant maze pieces.
For the vine tunnel models, my initial plan was to just reuse the cave tunnel pieces that we had made, but seeing as we needed 3D vine geometry on them, that wouldn't have been feasible. Vine geometry on each piece would have to meet up on another piece in all possible combinations. So instead of modeling out vines on each of the 24 pieces that we had for the caves, I figured out that by cutting each piece into 1/8 would reduce the workload on that. Zach was a tremendous help in that we figured out that with only 12 of the unique 1/8 shapes, we could easily reconstruct the full suite of sections that we needed. And this was accomplished by either rotating, flipping, or mirroring them.
So on our way up to the top of this maze, we'll hear something moan in the dark. And that's this trigger you see here. We have a set of second pass objects that load in now that transform the look of the first areas the player already went through. Now once we climb back up into the jump room, if we stand where we heard the laugh and look behind us, we'll be able to see Drought watching us from afar. Most players wouldn't think to look back, but those who did might get a bit creeped out. But I wanted to take a moment to pause here to talk about the rock climbing handhold system, which I'll turn over to Zach.
For climbing with handholds, we wanted to create a dynamic and flexible system that was easy for us to design around and easy for players to learn. Inspired by actual rock climbing, the player may climb from handhold to handhold on any surface, including ceilings. Behind the scenes, our first-person animations use two separate models of the player character's arms to convey holding on to the physical wall and reaching out towards the next handhold without clipping through other objects.
Moving on into the corn passage room, which is one of my favorite rooms, there's quite a bit going on in here. This room just feels like Halloween to me. Going through a spooky corn maze as a kid, with bright lights shining through the corn. So first and foremost, we have Drought up top again, looking down at you. This is very, very difficult to see, and can only be glimpsed if you're standing at the very end of the room after passing through it. Throughout the chapter, we have these rooms that hold dialogue within flowers. There is one just before this corn room where we can hear Drought talking, hinting that he's being watchful. Back in the corn room though, we can take a closer look at Zardy and the crows. They be just chillin'. Once the player steps into the room, a crow will fly up from the corn. We can see that this crow is stored right here out of sight. Just following this, the other two crows fly away, and Zardy will tilt to the side. He'll then fall into the corn and unload. Well, mostly. Parts of him can be found underground still. Whoops. The player can only see him fall into the corn through the harsh lighting though, where they have to go, so it creates an intense feeling of dread.
Oh no. Guys? I was just testing my reflexes. I'm not going down there, bro.
Oh my god. Ay, ay, ay. Alright, chill out. We got little crows playing games. Oh, whoa!
As the player moves through, this trigger here plays the sound of Zardy walking through the corn, creating an additional sense of unease. But one of my favorite scares is this scarecrow up here. So there's a few different scarecrows in here that the player can't see too well, but this one here is special. So this guy can actually fall into one of 3 spots depending on where the player is walking. The player has the ability to drop off the ledges at any point, but if they hit any of these 3 boxes, the scarecrow will fall down to that location. Kinda cruel on my end, but I love the slow pace new players went through this room due to fear. It felt like a traditional haunted house with startles.
Give me a chance. What the f was that, guys? Alright.
Now as the player comes around this bend and crawls through this tunnel, Zardy pops out. We can see he loads in right here and steps over very quickly as he screams. We actually used 2 Zardys for this. The animated cutscene Zardy gets replaced with the live enemy Zardy right after the last frame of the animation. But now it's time for the chase sequence, so let's swap back to recap mode. So the player needs to run a loop on Zardy and enter the crawl space again. Zardy will keep running after them as the player needs to dodge pumpkin crawlers and cut down some vine walls. Upon hitting the midpoint of the chase, the player will be fake jump scared, as Zardy just barely misses swinging his garden hoe at them. The player then runs ahead and needs to enter a crawl space. If the player tries to run forward, Pumpkin Jack will drop down and startle them, and then comment on why they aren't running yet. After the crawl space, the player will find themselves in a giant sunken cornfield. They need to destroy both giant flowers to move on. One is found up on a ledge, and the other behind a massive plant wall. The only safe space during this chase is up on the ledge, as Zardy will be hunting you down at all times. Upon defeating both flowers, the center will open up and the player must drop down to the blue light. They'll immediately find themselves caught by Pumpkin Jack and a bunch of crawlers. The player must wait for the crawlers to light up and then hit them with the axe. If they wait too long, Jack will jump scare them. If they do it correctly, they can grab the flashlight, freeze Jack, and unfortunately fall down the pit and into the second half of Chapter 1. But let's pause that recap. So this chase is the first time there's a threat that can kill the player, and so that means we have some jump scares to look at. Zardy's jump scare is similar to his from Zardy's Maze, and he'll whack the player with his garden hoe. This is what that looks like from a different perspective. Zardy also has a secondary jump scare for crawl spaces, and it's more so an in-your-face scream. We can watch this from third person as well, and you'll see he also hits you with the garden hoe. He used to reach out and pull you in, but it was kinda an unfair hitbox due to the range. Now for this chase, there's actually some trickery going on. We have several pacing devices in place that check if the player or Zardy have reached certain points. So if Zardy is close enough to the player, he won't warp closer. But if he's farther away, he'll warp closer to an area the player can't see. This helps keep the first part of the chase, which is more linear, a lot more tight and adrenaline pumping. When the player cuts the final vine wall, the last hit actually triggers a cutscene. Zardy will unload and appear behind the player as he swings at them. The Regressor and I actually workshopped this quite a bit to make it feel right. There's a visual trick too, that is way more clear in third person. Zardy's garden hoe actually slides backwards as he swings, so we can have its head pass right in front of the player's camera. It happens so quickly in game you don't see this, but viewing it from this angle, it's a bit more obvious. When the player regains control, this Zardy unloads, and the enemy Zardy begins chasing them again. Now when Jack falls, we can watch this in slow motion too. Jack drops from the tunnel up here to block the player's path, and he'll remain here until the player continues on. In the maze up ahead, we can watch the flowers retract from another perspective as they burrow underground. When the player reaches this ledge up here, we can see that Zardy will actually begin to walk backwards and fade away, signaling that he cannot reach the player. And there's a few other things that occur here too. So for one, the music becomes less aggressive when the player is in a safe zone. It mellows out, and is an audio cue that the player is safe. Upon jumping down again, the music picks back up. Also, if the player decides to just wait up top and not move, I added in a line of dialogue from Zardy, voiced by Chari5, that plays after a while where he mentions that they have to come down eventually, as he creepily laughs. I loved watching people's reactions to this.
You'll have to come down. Eventually.
That's crazy. That's sick.
But down the hole we go. So Jack can be found sitting behind this giant pumpkin frozen in place until the player falls down. And once they do, his hat vanishes so he can pick up the hat on the crawler next to him. This is where a pumpkin lad, Scott the Woz, makes his debut as he reaches out and grabs the hat while his legs bend in horrible ways. He looks a bit silly from this perspective, but the giant pumpkin blocks our view. Now, this animated segment was one of the Regressor's favorite animations, so I'll let him talk about making it.
For the Pumpkin Jack animation, it was the longest in-game animation I've ever done. So to start out, I blocked the main motions where Pumpkin Jack would start, when he would move, when he would stop, and any defining motions and poses. I placed colored locators on the ground to roughly map out where his feet would go to make the spacing and pacing of his steps easier to manage when I would get to them. Since he is a pumpkin, and his face is not human muscle and bone and all that, I used varying degrees of his mouth being open and closed to give the impression of speech and inflection in his voice. After all that, I went back for the final pass. All the small little tedious details that brings it together as a final piece. The pumpkin crawler wearing the hat was purely my idea. I just thought it'd be a little fun little gag.
Now, we can see that if we fail this challenge, we swap Cutscene Jack out for an actual enemy version that jump scares us. And we can see Jack crouches down before popping up to slash at us. If we do this correctly though, we'll see that upon picking up the flashlight, the previous cutscene Jack is replaced with a different one while our back is turned. He then jumps up and freaks out before ultimately being frozen by our light and crushing the final crawler holding us up. This poor crawler probably feels betrayed. We then fall straight down for an uncomfortable landing. Ouch. In case you were curious, this is where we actually have a map change. The area down here is only a shell of the actual second half of Chapter 1, and so all the pathways lead nowhere. While a character is knocked out, we force a scene load into a new area. So awakening, we slowly begin to rise, and unfortunately nudge our light, causing it to fall. I'm sorry for baiting you Zardy's Maze fans, but I had to. You'll get it soon, I promise. Anyways, our character rises to their feet, and then Jack starts calling down from up above, claiming he's too lazy to come get us. So instead, he'll help us get up to him so he can then kill us. A classy fellow. So we climb down and retrieve our axe, only to see our light get swallowed by the abyss. We then climb back up and solve a seed puzzle that requires the reordering of seeds you've already planted by giving them a good whack. This grants us access to a new seed type, a vine seed. Planting this in specialized plots will cause a giant vine to grow that we can walk on. This takes us up top back into this room full of pumpkins, where we then encounter a very sus looking Jack in the next hallway. We'll pause the recap there for a second. So as we are coming to, you'll see that our arm never actually touches our flashlight because it's off camera. Our elbows are just so powerful they create a gust of wind that pushes it off. The flashlight also falls down past where it actually lands, and then that light down there will activate and flicker. Jack can be found hanging over the hole like this, talking to us, and we never bothered animating him more than this because he looks super small in the distance, and you never get up close to see this version of him. Down below, you also see that the giant pit unsurprisingly leads nowhere except into a black void. Now, there is another character monologue room hidden in this climbing section, and you'll have to work your way back to it if you aren't fooled by my false end to this tunnel. Completionists may also want to search the seed puzzle room extensively too, because there might be more to explore than what is obvious at first. We can see that underground, there's already a giant vine waiting to grow, and it only needs the seed in place to start its animation along a spline. Let's first take a look at a regular seed being planted, and how that looks in slow motion from under the ground, and now let's check out this same thing with the vine seed. Now, there is another hidden audio trigger in this room that some players found, and others did not. Up near the top of this climbing section, if you fail this jump, you'll fall through this green trigger here. If you do this, Jack will insult you and say you suck.
Wow, you suck, man! How have you made it this far in life and not fallen to your death?
Dusting off your pride. Once you make it to the top, I actually unload Jack in this hallway here and then place him as a dead lad. But let's move on to the next section. So next up we have the Jack mazes, which is what we call them internally. It's a series of 3 mazes with the first and last maze being similar. You need to crouch and jump over wall crawlers so that you don't get caught on them. If you do, Jack awakens from his slumber and runs after you. After clearing the first maze, you'll hear an argument between Drought and Zardy. Zardy clearly doesn't want Drought nearby and tells him to stay away. We then drop down to Jack Maze 2, which consists of 4 different areas. Our goal is to chop 3 flower keys hidden in the 3 rooms, branching off the room we landed in. During this, Pumpkin Jack will be hunting us down and trying to find us. There is a flower all the way across the bottomless pit room that you'll need to cross the vines for. Then there's one hidden inside the remains of a stable. The last can be found at the top of a series of pathways within this layered cave. Once all 3 are found, we move on to Maze 3. Upon entering, we can hear Drought again asking us if we fear him. His voice echoes throughout the 3rd maze as Jack once again starts to chase us. We'll need to clear the right side of the maze and pass through the opening in the center to reach the left side, which ultimately drops us into the final massive room of the chapter. Let's once again rewind time. So this is what the Jack Maze areas look like from out of bounds. They are quite large, especially the 2nd maze. You get a nice sample of 3 different kinds of environments. Now back in the 1st maze, we can watch Jack rise to his feet as we get ensnared by a crawler. Now crawlers and Jack both place a character in a damaged state if the player is currently undamaged. He will only jump scare you if you haven't recovered from the damaged state, which lasts various seconds depending on what damaged you. If you are not hurt, Jack will instead trigger a jump stun. The player will push Jack away from them while entering the damaged state, and we can watch this in 3rd person to see that our body appears for this push. And of course, while we're here, we can watch the jump scare from another angle as well. Something else to point out in mazes is that it's wise to look for objects that stand out, whether it be plants that can show up in the corner of mazes, or a vine clipping through the roof potentially guiding you. Now Jack actually spawns into Maze 2 right when you hit the ground, and he then starts in the stable area. This area was actually the brainchild of Zach, so I'll let him talk about it and Jack's functionality here.
While our tools for generating mazes are pretty powerful, we wanted to include a more open, handcrafted maze to break up the tunnel sections. I proposed the 3 main sections of the 2nd Jack maze that made it into the final design. The goal of the vine room was to create an open-air maze that requires careful movement and rewards creating shortcuts by jumping across gaps. The barn room was a fun set piece that required searching a recognizable environment while avoiding Jack catching you in a dead end. Finally, the multi-layer cavern provided a simple 3D maze that benefits from memorization and rewards the player with a quick exit. Jack features some unique interactions here, including the ability to jump between different surfaces. We also nudge Jack in the right direction if the player moves too far away. This ensures the player is more likely to encounter Jack more than once while solving this maze.
Hidden within the stable section is another audio clip that plays if you decide to stay in the safe zone for too long. If the player enters between these hanging roots, which prevent Jack from following, you'll hear Jack say, "Aren't you a bit old to be playing hide and seek?" Jack's laziness is showing. Moving on to Jack Maze 3, Jack doesn't actually appear in this maze until the player steps beyond the first set of roots. A problem I ran into in development was Jack wanted to camp this first set of roots, which was kind of broken. But yeah, he appears right here when you step through. Another hidden item in this area, which fans have already found, is that there is an unused audio trigger. It was normally in the middle of the maze and would play unenthused audio of Jack saying, "Jack be nimble, Jack be quick," which references the English nursery rhyme of the same name. Jack be nimble was also a Zardy's Maze achievement for jumping over pumpkin crawlers instead of candlesticks successfully. But now we've entered the last area. Labeled as the final room, we have the 3 drought mazes within. When we first enter, we hear laughing echoing in the darkness. As we move across a broken land bridge, we'll then drop down into a vine where we'll officially meet Drought face to face. He tells us his name and that it's a pleasure to meet us as he bows and fades away. As we press on, we'll learn that Zardy doesn't want him here because he'll kill his work, as he says. But then the player falls into a small space and Drought appears on a boulder, explaining that Zardy isn't here, so why don't we play a game? The giant vines surrounding us shrivel and die, as Drought claims there is a twist to the game, and so we descend into a new type of maze, a traditional labyrinth with rock walls. We must grab the seed in the center, which triggers Drought to climb out of the ground to pursue us. We must make it through the maze, and plant it to get to the next maze. The second maze is bigger, and we must reach the other side compared to the middle like the first maze. So we can study the maze from up top, run through, and retrace our steps. The third maze offers no visual guide from above though. Drought claims he can see us as we move through it, and ultimately we need to feel our way through the labyrinth and take mental notes. After growing the final vine, we'll reach the top area with the tree, where we can then head down and pursue the blue light. After we step on this vine though, Zardy catches us as he ensnares us in a vine. An upset Drought then appears, and the two begin arguing back and forth. Zardy claims that Drought will ruin everything, and Drought states he's tired of sitting around and doing nothing. Drought then explodes in anger, as both the vine holding the player and the one below them shrivel up and die, causing the player to fall into a crevice as the chapter ends. So turning back the clock, as we walk out on this bridge, you can see the trigger for Drought's audio. We can also zoom out to take a look at this area too, because it's quite massive, and all the mazes take place in this giant chamber. I will note that completionists might want to take a look to their left and jump down below, but as we move across this bridge, we can see where Drought's introduction activates. You normally get up close to him anyways, so there's not much to see here, but as we move ahead, we can view the boulder cutscene from different angles. Unity's timeline system is super cool, and given I've edited and animated tons of stuff before, it was pretty easy to pick up and use. But now we can show off Drought emerging from the ground. His hands shoot up all creepily like a zombie's hands emerging from the earth. He then pulls himself up and pursues the player. If he reaches the player, his jump scare plays, and this is what that looks like from a different perspective. Now lots of players don't know this, but Drought has an alternative jump scare too. If the player picks up a seed and stands where Drought is spawning, Drought will eventually reach out and pull the player into the earth, sealing their fate. This is how that jump scare looks from a different perspective. It's just an extra surprise for curious players. Now, Drought's second maze holds a different secret. There's actually a cave below it. I really wanted to encourage exploration in this game to reward curious players for doing things you would normally do in a cave, looking around, climbing, and exploring. So if you look over the edge, you'll see that you can drop down. Inside, you can crawl through to a caved-in room, which, after exploring, will lead you to another lore-providing flower from the perspective of Pumpkin Jack. What a lovely place. Drought's third maze is similar to the second, but this is how it looks from above, inside that giant chunk of rock. You'll see an audio trigger stretching across this, which plays Drought's audio about how he can see you. Now up ahead is the final cutscene, but beyond it is where the player was planning on heading. Inside, there's an out-of-bounds secret that very prestigious players can reach if they channel their inner mountain goats. It's a nod back to the Friday Night Funkin' mod of Zardy and Cable Crow that broke many fingers for people. I'm truly sorry. Let's talk about that final cutscene now. So as the player steps out, we can see that a vine coil will spawn on their torso and rotate upwards as the camera is flipped around. Zardy then fades on, but watching all this from a different angle is going to reveal something rather silly. So as they continue to argue, and then the player gets blasted, the camera turns away from both Zardy and Drought, and never faces them again. So why not extend the animation? So what the player can't see is that we had some fun with it, and Zardy cowers in fear as Drought strikes a T-pose and then begins to fly towards him. True power has been achieved, but that's not all. So there's two other things. One, we can find Jack way up here just watching the player, but you can make out his face's emissive materials from afar. Now by far my favorite thing that players eventually found by experimenting is that there's an alternative ending here. Again, my goal was to reward players for having fun exploring and trying new things. Something I think more games in this genre should do, but don't always. So a player is going to eventually think, wow, I fall down this giant cliff from way up here and land in this small crevice. And yet, that's a safe action because I'm protected by a cutscene. Versus me just jumping off the cliff and dying. Two different results, similar distance, and that's 100% valid. As a game dev, I also realized this, so this made me realize why not play into that. I can't help but think of speedrunners and how they break games, and then animators on YouTube animate those speedruns into really funny videos showing how in-game characters freak out to absurd gameplay choices. So if you just straight up run and jump off the ledge and land in the crevice, well...
Did he just jump?
Yep.
Who is this lunatic?
I can only imagine a person dead-on sprinting and swan diving into the abyss gloriously. And with that wraps up Chapter 1. Now I know you've all been patiently waiting for Chapter 2, which is still in development at the time of making this video, but I do have something else planned for the 5-year anniversary of Zardy's Maze. This fall there will be a story you can listen to that takes place in the same world as Zardy. It'll be a 1 or 2-parter, not sure yet, but it's derived from a much bigger story which will come sometime after. As you may know, the gameplay of Zardy's Maze was inspired from a nightmare I had, but the story and characters behind it all existed years before. So I hope you enjoy my spooky tale when it drops. Subscribe to the Full Trek Media channel to be notified, And as always, thanks for watching, and in this case, listening, and cheers.